When it comes to navigating the murky and turbulent waters that is the modern metagame, it can be very tricky to not only figure out the cards that you want to put in your 75, but specifically, heck, even the planeswalkers that you want to throw in there. And in this video, I want to talk about why Jace the Perfected Mind may actually be a card that you need to play more of in your mill deck. And I want to talk through more so for the newer players joining the archetype. More enfranchised players will have their play styles and the list that they want to follow, and just generally the strategies that they want to beat, which maybe Jace doesn't fit in terms of their local meta or what they're seeing. And that's fine, but I want to maybe tip the scales in your favor a little bit, and at least, again, as I mentioned, convince those newer players to the archetype as to why a Jace can actually be really good outside of the Mind Sculptor, but maybe a Perfected Mind can be the option that you're looking for. Specifically, Jace the Perfected Mind, let's read it out. So 4 mana for a 2 generic, 1 blue, 1 Phyrexian blue Planeswalker Jace with completed. So if you were to pay a life and pay 3 mana for this, it would come into the battlefield with 2 less loyalty counters. So instead of coming in at 5 for 4 mana, it would come in at 3 for 3 mana plus a life. It has +1 until the end of your next turn. Up to 1 target creature gets -3/-0, -2 target player mills 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. Very similar wording to a card that you may already know. And then -X, where target player mills 3 times X. So in terms of the numbers there, that's, you know, that -X is if you pay it for 4, come down, you use it immediately. That's 3 times 15, 4 mana to mill 15. Or if you pay 3 mana and a life, it's going to come down with 3 times 3, 9, 3 mana, mill 9. So a lot to this card, a lot of aspects to this. And I think a lot of people are missing certain aspects of this card, especially going into a post-Fury metagame where things are generally a little bit slower, a bit more inviting for Jace in many ways. So let's talk about 3 reasons why I think this Planeswalker should be in your 75 of your mill deck. First and foremost, I kind of alluded to it a lot there. It's a discounted 3 mana Planeswalker, and that can be really powerful. Let's go over some of the other 3 mana Planeswalkers that you may have played in mill, or that you may not be considering in terms of the power level that it is analogous to, or at least in the same list as, even if it's not as powerful, still in that same list. But Mental Misstep is the first card that comes to mind, because ahead of that list, you have to understand the Phyrexian mana cost. So Mental Misstep is an extreme example of this, and this is why I wanted to pick it. For those of you who don't play more Eternal formats, you've never seen Mental Misstep legal in Modern, but especially in Vintage, you run into the problem, or Vintage Legacy, you run into the problem where Mental Misstep essentially becomes a 4 of in every deck because the formats are hyper efficient. There's a lot of 1 CMC spells out there, and so you essentially have to play Mental Missteps to counter your opponent's Mental Missteps. You go to play your first Delver, your opponent missteps, then you misstep, then you misstep, blah, blah, blah. It's back and forth. So free counter spells are already really powerful. So paying your life as a resource, it's not really a cost when you're stopping your opponent's win condition. Next up is Gitaxian Probe, an example of a card that once was legal in Modern, where combo decks were using it to look at, you know, see if the road is clear. And heck, even Infect players were doing that for the same reason. But a card that notably should be banned because it's kind of a better version of what Mishra's Bauble is now. Now, Bauble provides an artifact type line for Delirium, for Unholy Heat, and Dragon's Rage's Channeler, which is completely fair. But you get to look at your opponent's draw, which is specific to the information you're getting, and then you draw a card on your next turn. So there are some pluses and minuses. Again, the type for Delirium, and then you get to draw a card that can essentially beat Thoughtseize. If you see your opponent playing a black deck, you can activate on your opponent's turn, then you draw on your turn and you beat that. But Gitaxian Probe, the value is that it is free because it's Phyrexian. You look at your opponent's hand, which is a lot more valuable information in many scenarios, and of course it replaces itself. So highlighting the importance of the fact that this is 3, the 2 life is just a resource, and some of the very similar powerful things that you can do with just 2 life. It may not be a 1-for-1, but getting you to understand that paying 2 life isn't as bad as you think it is, even in a metagame where Eidolon of the Great Revel is making a comeback and burn. But Narset, Part of the Veils, is kind of what I was alluding to before. 3 mana Planeswalker that's very similar to it. You may have played it once in your mill deck if you've been playing it for a while. More so played in Narset Wheels right now, finding the wheel effects, counter magic, other Planeswalkers. Ashiok Dreamrender definitely in contention with this slot, where Ashiok provides a different set of utilities. So Ashiok just like Jace can be played in mono blue, can be played in mono black as well, unlike Jace. But the spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library, which is the static ability. And so this is very important in 5-color metas, in metas where Amulet Titan is all over the place. This card absolutely shuts that deck down. And then where a lot of shuffle effects are around, where mill is top of the metagame, this is a card that definitely should be in your sideboard. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard and then exile each opponent's graveyard. So you can mill yourself to then enable a visions count, which can work with Jace, as we're going to talk about in a bit, and then exile. And then finally, Dak Fade-In, kind of the top end of what a 3-mana Planeswalker can be. 1 blue and red for a 3-mana Planeswalker. Dak with 3 loyalty, +1 target player draws 2 cards and discards 2 cards. -2, gain control of target artifact. And then -6, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell that targets 1 or more permanents, gain control of those permanents. Not instead, you just, if it targets it, you target it, and then that spell will resolve, but you also gain control of that permanent as well. But Dak Fade-In at the top end, and then maybe like Narset and Ashok at the bottom end, and then I would honestly say Jace is somewhere in the middle. Very powerful 3-mana Planeswalker. The swath of the Planeswalkers that you have available to it, costing 3, coming down on turn 3, and just doing that on that turn is very powerful. Optionality is key. The next reason why I think Jace the Perfected Mind should be being played in your mill deck is its ability to mimic one of the most powerful cards in Magic's history, Ancestral Recall. Now let me know in the comment section down below if you believe that Ancestral Recall is a more powerful Magic card, or Black Lotus is a more powerful Magic card. It's an interesting argument on both sides. I don't know if it really goes anywhere, but my personal opinion is Ancestral, so let me know in the comment section down below if you agree. But because of the way that mill operates, it works at a disadvantage to find a win condition that is very hard to achieve and working against the way the game is designed in a lot of ways, right? The decking out clause is essentially just to make sure that people aren't indefinitely just continuing games to a draw. It ends the game at a certain point, and we're taking advantage of that. And with the game not being designed around that, you have to mimic powerful abilities like this. No other deck is necessarily drawing 3 cards for 1, whereas we are. So Visions of Beyond, being one of the most powerful cards ever printed for the archetype, is seeing less play now, where it's 1 mana to replace itself, draw a card at instant speed. If a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you would draw 3 cards instead. So very easy to understand why it's synergistic with mill. But Jace the Perfected Mind has that minus ability that mimics that. So -2, target player mills 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 more cards in it, you draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. So the wording's kind of flipped there, but regardless, it's the same effect, but there's a lot more to it. Specifically, if you play it at 4, then you're going to be able to -2 this to 3, which is relevant. And then if you play this at 3, you have it at 3 loyalty, you -2 to 1. So Jace is still alive in both scenarios. You are not like, kamikazing the card to draw 3 cards and mill 3, and it has very relevant text as well. So target player mills 3 cards. It kind of has the I have Ruin Crab up here, but it really is Hedron Crab text, where Hedron Crab can target yourself, target your opponent, and then in this case, past that, it has the ability to then play that visions role in a list where, heck, even the mill master himself, Tybalt of Red Sub, is reducing the copies of Visions of Beyond, acting as copies 3 and 4 essentially of that card, but with more flexibility. And I think that's what's important to note with this card. The card is flexible, it has a lot of options, it has a lot of ways that you can play it. Next reason why you should be playing Jace the Perfected Mind, really the final reason before we get into some extras, is that it is a bad copy of Fractured Sanity, which is important because redundancy is key in an archetype where you need to top deck really well. There are going to be a lot of situations where you are out of resources. You need to take advantage of very, very good top decks at that point. If you're not playing Preordain, especially where you don't have that card selection, you need extra copies of your cards. Fractured Sanity is 3 mana to mill 14 cards, each opponent getting around hexproof effects, whereas Jace's effect does not. You cycle for 2 to draw a card, mill 4, which notably gets around counter magic, and Jace does not. But Jace's ability specifically kind of scales up later on. One of the better cards to have when you're grinding out, your opponent doesn't have a threat to wipe you out with. At 3 mana, again, as I mentioned, you're going to play it for 3 with 3 loyalty. You're going to mill 9. Then at 4 mana, you're going to have it at 5 loyalty, 3 times 5, 15 cards milled. And then at that point, if you're plussing, then it's just going to go up, more and more from there. It can be a very, very lethal magic card. Just after, 2 activations can be milling over a third of your opponent's deck. Very powerful in that case. And then finally, I'm going to go over some niche scenarios, some bonuses as to why you should be playing Jace. Now, firstly, worst case scenario, if the card is dead in your hand, you don't have a way to cast it, it pitches to something like Subtlety or Force Negation. Subtlety is still a good Magic card, especially in a world where Scam is still being played in many different variations. Subtlety, relevant Magic card. I'm personally still playing it, but it still pitches that, or Force Negation for some of you more masochistic players that are playing Force and Mill, which is not a good idea unless you're playing at a local level. I will say that if you're playing at a local level, there are decks that you may want to target with Force Negation. Otherwise, if you're playing Force Negation in leagues, trust me, you are playing the deck suboptimally. Do not do that. Subtlety is much better. Next up, Ensnaring Bridge. Jace the Perfected Mind is probably the best card that you can have underneath Ensnaring Bridge. Probably the best without a doubt. Forget the crab, forget everything. You are affecting the board. You are able to draw 3 cards whenever you need to, which is anti-synergistic to Bridge. But in that case, your opponent isn't attacking you. You are drawing 3 fresh cards on your turn. You have the optionality there. And then you can just keep upticking and then minusing and keeping Jace alive, all this good stuff. One of the best cards to have under Ensnaring Bridge. But finally, Dragon's Rage Channeler, cards that generally are going to be attacking you for a relevant amount of damage. Like Dragon's Rage Channeler, lightning bolting you every turn. Just shutting that off is very good, especially against Ragavans, where Ragavan needs to deal combat damage to you. If it's dealing 0 damage, that is not damage at all. They are not getting the triggers. Very relevant against certain creatures as well. The effect is important, especially going up until your next turn. So just going to shut out completely for the rest of that cycle. Now, especially if your opponent is taking extra turns, that's going to matter there as well, because it's not up until the next turn, it's up until your next turn. So if your opponent is kind of attacking you with extra turn shenanigans with 1 threat, you can just shut that threat out, and that threat is not going to become more powerful once they start their new turn. Has to go to yours, then back to theirs. The extra turns do not matter. Jace kind of beats that, which is an interesting niche scenario. Now, that is my list. That is my list as to why you should be playing more Jace the Perfected Mind in your mill decks. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have you taken that out of your side 75? Are you going to consider putting it back into your 75 after this video? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And me, myself, I'm definitely going to be playing some Jaces. And as you see in the video down below, I am playing this while queuing up for the prelim. You might be seeing some gameplay later in the week. So let me hop into that match. The video is ending right now.